when we look at our prevention practices, taking time to go, how does this fit our culture, is going to strengthen it. And all of us can benefit. All young people can benefit from that, not just those from historically underserved or marginalized communities.
Welcome to this Children's Safety Network conversation about preventing youth suicide. I'm Jennifer Leonardo, Director of the Children's Safety Network, known as CSN. CSN is a project of Education Development Center and is funded by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services through the Health Resources and Services Administration's Maternal and Child Health Bureau. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for youth between the ages of 10 and 24, trailing only unintentional injuries. There is no one single risk factor for youth suicide. Rather, a host of risk factors, including depression and other mental illnesses, substance use, social isolation, and historical trauma, all contribute to suicide risk. Suicide prevention practitioners, including the Title V agencies that CSN works with, often turn to protective factors to lower the risk of suicide within a community. Building cultural connections and fostering cultural identity are two powerful approaches, especially in communities that experience higher than average suicide risk because of historical oppression, underinvestment, or prejudice. In today's conversation, I speak with Shelby Rowe. Shelby is the director of the Suicide Prevention Resource Center and a frequent speaker on the issue of youth suicide prevention. Shelby is a member of the Chickasaw Nation, a bead artist, and a mother of 3. She is also a suicide survivor. We discuss the important role that culture can play in suicide prevention. Shelby also shares some examples of promising collaborative practices from the field.
Shelby, it's great to talk to you. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself and what drew you to the field of suicide prevention?
Absolutely. It's good to talk to you too, Jennifer. What drew me to the field of suicide prevention was my work at a crisis center. I started my career working in substance abuse prevention and teen pregnancy prevention. And in 2005, I moved to Arkansas. 2007, I took a job as director of the Arkansas Crisis Center, and they had the statewide suicide hotline, which linked up to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline Network. And even though I was a suicide attempt survivor myself, what really got me interested in building my career in suicide prevention were listening to the stories of our callers. There were a few callers that their stories really stood out to me, and I have been on a mission to make the world a safer place for people at risk for suicide ever since.
That's wonderful. At the Children's Safety Network, we focus on youth suicide, and I'm wondering, the Suicide Prevention Resource Center does a lot of work around culturally competent approaches. Could you discuss how culture and context affect youth suicide prevention?
Yes, I can. And I'm glad that you asked. A lot of times when people are thinking about culture and prevention, we're thinking specifically of, like, for myself, I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation. So when I think of culture, I think of tribal culture. I think of what it's like to be an urban native. But for your listeners and for others, I would really challenge them to look at culture as in, what neighborhood do you live in? What community, what is your culture? Because we all have culture that can contribute to those protective factors to keep us safe. Your culture would be, those things close to you, your faith practices, your family, your community. That part of when you go, who are my people? Those are your people. And so in each community has their own culture, just as each family has their own culture. More and more research is being done specifically with tribal communities and showing that embracing culture is prevention. That a lot of times we don't recognize that whatever culture a best practice was developed in, that culture is kind of baked into that practice. I'm an urban native. I've always lived in a city. So my tribal culture looks very different than someone who lives on the Navajo Nation or someone who lives in a village in Alaska. Even though it's all tribal, those cultural differences are there. And so I think when we look at our prevention practices, taking time to go, how does this fit our culture, is going to strengthen it. And all of us can benefit, all young people can benefit from that, not just those from historically underserved or marginalized communities. And that's something I see in our field, that we forget that culture is prevention for every single one of us, and not just those in smaller communities not served by the mainstream.
I appreciate some of those key points that you just made. Thank you, Shelby. Really expanding on this concept of culture and outlining that it can mean a lot of different things, and to consider all of the factors, and to really create that space and give it the time in order to do these adaptations that are so necessary for prevention. How do your own cultural experiences and background affect your perspective on the role of culture in prevention?
So, as someone who grew up in a city away from my tribe, I always felt like I didn't fit in, that I didn't belong. And so, as I got older, and I remember the first time I visited the Chickasaw Cultural Center as an adult, feeling like I was home. And this weird feeling of listening to people sing songs in Chickasaw, learning things, and it's hard to explain, but it's like being lonely for a home you've never been to. And when you are there, you go, oh, this is where I belong. And so reconnecting and learning more about my tribe and connecting with the culture has been such a powerful thing of healing. And I think for some, it's through experiencing it. For others of us who don't grow up living in the middle of it, it may start off almost as an academic exercise of learning, but the more you learn and then connecting with other individuals in your tribe, it is a powerful healing sensation. So it has been so beneficial for me personally, and encourage that for everyone.
I'm curious if you know of any programs that are starting to integrate the issue of culture and context into their programs successfully. Are there particular models that you would highlight or point to?
So there are a few programs. The White Mountain Apache has a long-standing partnership with Johns Hopkins University, and they have been able to adapt different prevention models, different suicide prevention framework, and really show a difference in reducing rates. I think collectively, the tribes in Washington state have been able to work together. Washington state funded through their legislature a tribal call center for 988. And with that, a team of tribal call specialists were hired, trained, and they worked with every tribe in the area that they served, over 20 tribes of, we're here, we want to be here to help you. And those crisis line workers of being trained not only in everything it takes to be an accredited call center specialist, but also in knowing and understanding and adding to the database different cultural practices, and making sure of responding that sometimes a referral for mental health care isn't what they need. Maybe they're like, where is my local community? I'm looking for a beading circle. I'm looking for a powwow. I want to go be around other tribal people. So they're doing great work up in that Pacific Northwest area. The North Portland area Indian Health Board, they have a program called We Are Native. It's kind of a national youth leadership project and program of really integrating culture into public health conversations. And so they're always doing innovative work. They have an annual conference. So I would definitely recommend folks look up, Google them. They're always doing really unique things of bringing culture into that public health conversation.
Thank you. Those are great models. I want to talk a little bit about the frame of prevention, in that sometimes unintentionally it can exclude people who are survivors of suicide themselves, or people who have experienced a loss. And you've talked about nurturing healing among those who have broken in your work. Could you tell me a little bit more about what nurturing healing looks like for young people and also for those who experience the trauma of suicide?
Absolutely. As an individual who's a suicide attempt survivor, but as a prevention professional, as I'm working with communities and individual healing, the key word in that is nurturing. Personally, I love my spreadsheets and my checklists. And we can think, okay, if I do X, Y, and Z, if I do steps 1 through 9, I will be healed. I can check it off my list. And to step back and nurture the kindness, patience, compassion, knowing that that healing cycle is going to be different for everyone. Grief will be different for those who have lost someone. That's a very complicated loss to grieve. Years ago, I had a loss survivor tell me that their child was the victim and perpetrator of the most violent crime they could imagine. And they had all the feelings that went with that. And that always stuck with me. It takes time. I know there are researchers out of Columbia University doing work on a suicide bereavement therapy model. Also, a little bit of a shameless plug because SPRC has a new training tool, but I think getting more school counselors, more mental health professionals, and parents trained in doing safety planning. There is an evidence-based practice, the Stanley Brown safety plan that's been researched in multiple populations and shown to be an effective framework to build healing around for those who have struggled with intense thoughts of suicide or for those who've made a suicide attempt. SPRC worked closely with Barbara Stanley before she passed, and online on our website, sprc.org, we have an online course. It is free. It's a wonderful training course to talk about how to work with a young person on working through that safety plan and staying collaborative. So I think part of that with nurturing, we can't give someone healing. We can't teach someone healing, but we can collaborate and work with them and nurture them. Providing that compassion can help them heal.
I hear you talking about the collaboration between all of the practitioners and then those who are affected by suicide. And I also heard you expanding beyond some of the usual partners that we think of when you're mentioning school staff or parents. Could you talk a little bit more about that in light of the shortage of mental health providers and the barriers that we have with access to care among different populations?
Yes, it can be empowering and frightening for families, that when they have a child who's at risk, even the best therapy in the world is 1 hour a week, 1 to 2 hours a week. And then that parent for the rest of those hours can feel a little overwhelmed when it comes to how do I help my child stay safe? How do I help nurture their healing? How am I a good partner for this? So again, I encourage everyone, the course primary audience for it is mental health professionals, but I think it's helpful for everyone who works with young people. If you're an educator, if you are a Sunday school teacher, anyone who works with young people, to know how to help create a plan. Because it's one thing to say, I want you to be safe. It's another to be like, what are the steps that we'll take? And how can we help you get there? Even though it's really scary when a young person comes up to us and says, I don't know how to stay alive. I want to die. I don't know how to live through this. We get scared and we can respond startled. And for that young person, it can sound like we're mad at them. And those immediate steps can feel abrupt and punitive. It is so hard to watch anyone we love struggle and suffer. And as a mom of 3 boys, it is very hard, but to sit in that discomfort, sit with them in their pain. And no matter how bad it hurts for them to tell us that they don't know if they see a reason to stay alive, that they're feeling hopeless, that the first thing we do is tell them, I'm so glad that you trusted me enough to tell me. I'm so glad you came to me with this. So reward that help-seeking behavior. We may not want to hear it, and your child knows that you don't have all the answers, and that's okay. To say, I'm so glad you trusted me. I'm so glad you told me. How can I help? It is so hard to ask for help, and I don't know about other people. Again, I'm a mother of sons. There was a time in adolescence where just getting them to tell me what they ate for lunch that day, what they did at school, this was hard for them to have that conversation. I can't imagine how hard it is to come with something as scary as I'm having thoughts of suicide. So if they do come and tell you that, definitely reward it. Let them know that you're so glad they came to you.
I really hear how powerful it is to meet them where they're at, and that amount of compassion and receptivity to being open and welcoming them and really thanking them for sharing what they're facing. I too have 3 sons, so I'm relating to what you're saying, Shelby. I also want to take a little step back and bring this to the state level and some of the work that the Children's Safety Network does. Our key partners include Title V agencies. So we often are working with state level healthcare practitioners, departments of health, departments of mental health, and teams of people that they're bringing together from their communities. And I'm wondering, if you're thinking about state public health workers, what would be a unique role for them in this space of suicide prevention for youth?
So one unique role is knowing that it's a holistic experience. Being a child in that community touches every facet. And so many times in public health, especially at the state level, we get in our little niche areas. Our suicide prevention folks don't always talk to our early childhood development, to our Head Start folks, to our substance misuse prevention folks. We know through research that reducing adverse childhood experiences reduces suicide risk across the lifetime. And so knowing, if a parent is going through drug court, are you connecting with the suicide prevention team and making sure providing good resources for that parent and for that young person? If they're going in the home and doing training, are we bringing in things like, parent-child interaction therapy and things to help parents know how to interact, relate, and have healthy bonding with their child? Oftentimes we see suicide prevention as its own platform, whereas it often is the outcome, the result of other childhood trauma, other childhood experiences, that if we keep it isolated in suicide prevention, we miss a lot of upstream prevention opportunities.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal lived experience and your professional expertise, and for really encouraging us to consider suicide prevention holistically and the importance of being inclusive and considering culture. We appreciate your time, Shelby. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this conversation from Children's Safety Network. If you are interested in learning more about how CSN is advancing child safety across the United States, visit our website, www.childrenssafetynetwork.org.